I am excited to share my dear friend, Chris Benfer, with everyone. He, among other things, is a financial advisor. And he has always been a strong foundation to stand on when things get crazy. He's somebody that I can reach out to and ask questions. His life's work is part of what he's going to share with us today. So I thank you so much for joining us, Chris. Could you give us a little bit of background? Because I'm not doing you any justice right now.
Yeah, sure. I have been in financial advising, certified financial planning, working with individuals for 26 years, since 1994. And it has, it was different when I was in my mid-20s than it is now, for sure, both who I am and what the industry was and has become. And it's really matured over time, which is a great thing. I have this great job where I form these really financially intimate relationships with a wide variety of really good people and help them feel better. And so it's a pretty cool job.
That is a cool job. And it's interesting that you say feel better, because it sounds like the financial well-being of someone is in part emotional.
So it's a big part emotional, and people have a lot of anxiety around their finances, and and it comes at them intermittently. And so one day you worry about how you're going to pay for your kids' college, and then the next day you worry about whether you're going to get that raise or what do you do with that bonus. And so the challenge I think individuals have is an inability to look at it holistically, rather than just take it. It's kind of like that assembly line in that old Lucy skit, or Lucille Ball thing, where they're eating, and it's hard. And then, so typically what happens in my experience is that they just tolerate it till they can't. And usually that's when they're coming up on retirement often, or they have a really good friend who passed away and their family wasn't taken care of, or they didn't have their wills and trusts in place, or times like this where people are really scared and don't know what to do and feel motivated to reach out.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to share your wisdom with everyone today, and myself, is this unprecedented, in my opinion, really unusual, stressful time that it feels like we're just lost. And I think, your profession is one where we could get some guidance, and maybe even just like things that we shouldn't do or things that we should do. And I think it would be helpful just if we could back up before we get into the nitty gritty here of like, what is a financial advisor? I think there's some concern around that. I found it interesting that people were reaching out to me asking really kind of about your character. And, I found that maybe just because I'm not really close to that circle, but like, how can you, what is financial advisory?
So the challenge that my industry faces is a lack of good labels and a historically very low barrier for entry. So for years and years, many people have called themselves a financial advisor when they were really, fill in the blank, insurance salesman or retail investment salespeople, and that that low barrier of entry in order to get into it meant that people would get into this business who weren't really professionals, but rather were trying to make a buck. And there's a lot of people who made a lot of money calling themselves financial advisors. There's been the Certified Financial Planning organization, of which I'm part, has worked real hard to kind of change that image, because it is a profession. There is a lot of, one of the things maybe we'll talk about today is how everything is so interrelated, and you need to have a knowledge about taxes and investments and legal and insurances and all the things that do impact a family or a small business's financial. It's real unfortunate.
Yeah.
And it's a really trusting thing too. So it's not just that people have done bad things, but it's like you're bearing your financial soul to this person and then have a bad experience So it kind of makes it that much worse.
For sure. And coaching is similar in that there is a low barrier for entry, and somebody could decide today that they're going to be a coach. So it's not even as regulated as your industry. So I appreciate that. And thanks for the background. And one of the things that you continually say when I ask you about financial matters is you talk about having a toolbox. So I decided to bring in a toolbox. So we had a visual, and that you said that financial planning is like one of the tools in the toolbox. So we shouldn't get too hung up on that being like the be all end all, but it's, or maybe even financial planning is a toolbox. And then there's
Right.
a variety
The investments.
more like it.
Yeah. My story I tell ad nauseum is that, like if I go to a party or if I meet somebody new and they ask me what I do, I say financial planning and they hear investments. And then I say again, I do financial planning, and what they hear is investments. And a lot of people view investments and financial planning as kind of one and the same. And while we do help our clients with their investments, I always say that we have this toolbox that we work with. And in that toolbox are all these different ways in which we can help people meet their financial goals. The hammer, which is the tool we reach for the most often, is investments. But then, there's different types of hammers, there's different types of investments. So that's the thing that, I think is important, for perspective for people who are learning or listening to this conversation. Is my perspective is that the only way you can truly understand your financial situation is to look at everything. Everything is interrelated. I think everybody wants to retire, or everybody has some sort of retirement plan. So oftentimes people say, oh, what do I need to retire? And the industry has done a horrible job in this sense. And I don't know if you remember like the old ING ads where they used to carry around that big number, like, what's your number? And my number is, 1,400,000, and 17 cents, whatever that is. And it's just such a disservice to the factors that go into saving for retirement. If you think, so I'm 52, I have 3 kids. I have a daughter who's going to college next year. I have 2 other kids that are in high school. My wife stays at home. We have 2 elderly sets of grandparents. And all I need is a number. I need to know, right? Like, how do I pay for college? How do I save for my retirement? How do I protect my financial interest in my in-laws and my parents? How do I make sure that if I'm the only earner in the family financially, what happens if I become disabled, or what happens if I die? How do I make sure that everybody in my family can be taken care of? All those are retirement planning. It is not just a number. And I think that's when I talk about this toolbox, the other analogy, which is a little even cheesier than my toolbox one, is kind of the jigsaw puzzle. Like, you have this picture, like, oh, I want to be able to retire, but you got to put all these pieces together and they're all interrelated. Yes. So I think that, to try to give people some perspective or some understanding more about, when they're working with a financial planner, or what might be good to look at is, one of the things that's really, really important is taxation, right? So we meet a lot of people come to us and they're ready, they're just about to retire, and we're like, okay, bring your statements. And then you have, 5 different IRAs, or they have 2 IRAs and, 2 old 401k plans. And then, the one they forgot about, and then the spouse. And those accounts are all taxed similarly. And they think that they have maybe diversification because they have these different accounts. But really, all those accounts are just these like tax protecting envelopes that hold their whatever investment selection in there. So we'll often see that people have, 3 different IRAs that all have the same mutual fund in it, but they think they're diversified because they have 3 different accounts. And that's the sort of thing which, when you talk about it, you're like, oh, duh, I didn't even think of that. Of course, but it's just, there's so much life going on that there's really no time to sit down and talk about that. So accounts and how they're structured, who owns them, how they're taxed, is all important. I know that you put out a request for people who might have questions about, particular products or anything. So in the toolbox, there's life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
believe in life insurance, right?
Insurance.
Right, the screwdriver, right? So, life insurance is something that you sure as heck want if somebody that you rely on is to pass away, right? And you really want to make sure that that is there and that you have the appropriate amount. The problem with life insurance is it's oversold. The wrong types of it are sold. People don't understand what they've purchased. It can be expensive if people structure it one way versus another.
Mm-hmm.
Um, any of these insurances, which are very important for the right reasons, disability insurance, long-term care insurance, and annuities,
Yeah. Yep.
all have a place inside of specific people's needs. But the challenge is finding what that place might be. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't start with that. Start with the investments, start with the insurance, start with the wills, start with that stuff until you know what you're trying to accomplish. And that's the big part.
Okay, so it starts with the goal.
Yeah, just like everything else.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
So,
Yeah, so you start with the goal, and when you're talking about goal, are you talking like retirement goal, end of life goal? Are you talking about like maybe you start with the end in mind and then you back it into
yeah.
like what do I want to accomplish this year? I mean, for those who are feeling overwhelmed by just this concept of setting a goal and they're like,
Right.
what's the option
So,
of us?
we do you want to retire? If you want to retire, about when do you want to retire? After you retire, do you think you want to do a little bit of work to earn some income, or are you just going to be cold turkey, no more income? Do you want to send your kids to college? How do you want to pay for that? Do you want to send them to a state college or a private college?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you want them to have a little skin in the game or not? Do you feel an obligation to pay for everything, or do you want to pay for a piece of that?
Mm-hmm.
If something were to happen to you tomorrow, would you want your spouse to remarry? Like, can you imagine a scenario where they would remarry?
Mm-hmm.
If so, which I like, so I share, right? So if I drop dead tomorrow, I hope my wife remarries, right? I hope that my kids have a father figure and that she finds love, all those things. But we've done a lot of financial planning and I want to make sure that the money that we've set aside goes to the purposes that we both agree to it, not some new, I don't know, you make up a movie, like some person comes in and takes a
Yeah.
minute. So how do we set up legally and set up our wills and our trusts for all those things? All these conversations, which are way up here,
Mm-hmm.
dribble down into a plan. And that plan is about structure and it's about products and it's about legal documents and all those other things, just to make sure that we have the best chance of accomplishing our goal.
Mm-hmm. Great. So the other thing that you just mentioned was around the having all of these different IRAs and plans and how sometimes it's sloppy. And I'm positive that there are people who are with us this morning that are like, that's me. Like, I have no clue where everything is. Where would they start? Is there a place that they could just use their social security number and get everything? Like, how do you like just get your arms around your baseline?
So the most complicated people I've ever worked with have been able to get everything they own onto one page, put it onto one page, go collect the information, put it in one document and say, all right, here are my investment accounts, here are my insurances, here is my will, here, like, get it all onto one page. And then you start to see the redundancies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have that old Vanguard IRA that I've had forever since I quit that job 10 years ago.
Okay.
So a big part of this is getting organized, because then you can say, all right, well, here's my goal. You need to know where you're starting from, right? So I'm starting from this, and that is really about what you've accomplished so far.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that's a good place to start, is setting the goal, getting your arms around what is and where you want to go,
Right.
and then starting to put a plan together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so once you're organized and once you understand kind of where you're starting, right? And we call it net worth statement, call it whatever you want, your summary, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Now you say, okay, well, to get from here to there, what do I need to do? Right. And I might need to go see an attorney to get my will updated. I might need to open a college account and I might need to start saving for retirement. Right. Then you say, all right, well, if I'm going to save for college, I've heard about these certain types of college savings funds called 529s. I don't know what they are, but maybe I need to do a little research in that sleeve, or maybe I need to do a little research about like whether or not an IRA or a Roth IRA might be best for me. The problem people have is they start at the bottom in the weeds and the minutia of like this IRA and that 529 plan and this, kind of all this craziness.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's so much easier to start big picture and then just kind of take the steps down into the different options
Okay.
and segment what you're trying to accomplish, usually by prioritization,
Mm-hmm.
and go from there.
Okay. All right. And is there like a checklist that exists somewhere that do you have?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we have, I put checklists. I think you put stuff on the
Yeah, I'll send follow up.
website afterwards. I can give you a checklist, but it's just about getting organized. So once you're organized, then, and you start to get from here to there, it is oftentimes about accumulating things. So it's either you're accumulating things or you're protecting. The protecting is kind of the insurance part. But on the accumulating side, say, I want to pay for my kids. So my deal is I want to pay for my kids to go to state college. They go beyond state college. We talk about sharing in that because we want to have an appreciation for the difference and the return on investment and kind of all those conversations so that they can grow up. In the end, that's the conversation I have with them. I've saved to be able to pay for the whole thing, but I want to have that conversation. So that's just who I am.
Yeah.
By the way, the other thing I've had conversations with really successful people for 26 years, 6 times a week. Right. So I've cherry picked all the best ideas on how to have conversations with my kids. And
that's great. So another piece of advice, Chris, just for all of us who are tuning into this, is to have your own personal board of directors and the people who give you input, and then you decide what you want to do it, right? You cherry pick what fits for you, what's in sync with your core values and your goals. But to make sure that you have those advisors in your life who can give you ideas.
Yeah. And I think that's as important as any other part of this whole conversation. So let's just say, find a simple one, which is I need to save for college. Well, it's really a math problem, right? I know that I'm going to pay for a state college right now. Say Penn State is $40,000 a year, the most expensive state school in the country. And I'm going to back that down. I just had a baby. How much do I put away every month? I mean, there's nobody on this call who can't do that math, right? And so we're going to put, this much away every month. And then where do we put that money? Mm-hmm. So what happens is the conversation starts to move towards cash flow, right? So cash flow, how much money is coming in versus how much money is going out, mm-hmm. is critical to financial planning. Budgeting is not, right? So if month to month, our general living, we go to Wawa or we go to Starbucks or we do whatever. If that's our life, we want to quantify what that is, mm-hmm. which takes maybe a little bit of tracking, mm-hmm. right? But us saving $1 by getting a medium versus a large, whatever we get wherever we go, isn't what's going to move the needle. If we're down to that level of detail in our financial plan, we've come a long, long way from just kind of where we started with our goals, right? Yeah. Start with, okay, we typically go out to dinner once a week. We go out to dinner once a week. It typically costs $100 for the 5 of us to go out there, whatever it happens to be, right? Mm. And then once you have that information, you can project it out, right? So this is what I spend, right? And here's where I expect it to go over time. So I have like a little, can I show some graphics?
Please, yes.
So
visual people.
All right, so I apologize to the group.
Use the chat and the Q&A because he's open to questions. So everybody feel free to type in what's on your mind.
Okay, we okay? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it perfect.
All right. So JP Morgan, so one of the things being in my job is I get inundated with information from all different kind of mutual funds and investment companies and 401k companies. And a big part of what I do is kind of wade through information for a living so that I can share something that's of value. JP Morgan provides these quarterly reports, which are great. And I really kind of got a lot of information for today off of this. But this is just a graphic. I'm a big picture person. This graphic, don't get bogged down in the details on here, but it just kind of shows how over time our spending changes, right? So Shannon, you and I both have high school kids, right? We spend a lot of money on food, a lot of money on sports stuff, but then that's going to end, mm-hmm. right? That's going to end when they go off on their own and do all those other things. So there's a difference between, say, Kim and I going out to dinner something that we like to do, which we'll do for the rest of our lives, hopefully.
Hmm.
And then the money I spend on baseball travel teams.
Sure. And bats, my
And
gosh, you educated me on the cost of a bat. Oh my goodness.
right. So, and that's important when you're doing a financial planning, because the death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to long-term planning is inflation, right? So what might cost $200 today when I'm 52, when I'm 92 is going to cost whatever, $2,000. And so once we understand where we are with our net worth statement or our financial snapshot or whatever that is, and then we understand what our goals are, we have to inflate those goals out on retirement plan, especially, right? So what am I going to need from an expenses? I'm not going to need to pay for Noah's baseball when I retire. He's going to be off doing something, probably not professional baseball, right? So I need to be able to identify those expenses that will always be with me and those that will fall apart away, so that I have a realistic understanding of what those are, and then I inflate them out.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. So in practical terms for like today, what does that mean for us from like a daily application? Or are you just giving us a view of like expenses over time?
I'm I'm giving a view of expenses over time, and I'm trying to get across the idea again that not to be lost in the details, but to get a general sense of what does it cost you to live
Okay.
month to month,
There you
which
go.
I think most people can say, and then just dig a little bit deeper to say of those, which of those expenses will go away and
Okay.
which will stick around.
Great.
So
Not on this when you're talking about cash flow, which is really like the difference between what you bring in and what you spend, right? And just simple math is that you should spend less than you make. And with that remainder, investments and whatever else that
right,
you're planning to contribute to. So you're saying here like where the money's going to go is going to change over time, but that equation is always going to be the baseline.
right. So
Okay.
it takes monitoring, right? So it's not a set it and forget it. Like if our clients, we and all good financial planning clients, that you sit once a year, you sit down. I say move the guide rails, right? So I picture this road from here to retirement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's guide rails along the road, and every year we just move those guide rails forward a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Some years we zig. This year we zagged big time, right? There's a
Big
lot
time.
of like
Yeah, we're
moving
gonna
back
get
and
to that.
forth,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we know that if we're only going a year or 6 months or whatever makes sense to kind of have those conversations,
Yep.
then you're not gonna get off course as far, right?
Thank you.
So the other thing on two things I'll say is, one, I want to be sensitive to time because there are other things we want to talk about, but systematically saving, systematically having that money go into some place before you pay your bills. With technology today, it's so easy to set up another account at your bank with it automatically, whatever, 500 or $1,000 every month just goes in there. You don't even have to push the button, right?
Yeah.
We do the same thing with our giving at church or giving to charities, or as many things as I can set up that just automatically go. Then
Mhm.
I'm not required to sit down and say, you know what, there's $500. I got a better use for that $500. I want to go out to do something like
Yeah.
5 dinners or whatever.
Right.
So that's kind of my piece on the expenses. Income, non-pandemic time income, right? More traditional times income. A lot of people that we work with have bonus structures. So they make their regular compensation throughout the year, and then they get a bonus every February, right? Or whatever, every April. So typically that's a great time to sit down and revisit your financial plan.
Okay.
If you don't, the problem is you think about the last conversation you had, right? So bonus comes on Tuesday. Last Saturday night, I was having a conversation with somebody about how expensive colleges are. I better put that money in the college account.
Mhm.
Or last Saturday night, I was having a conversation with somebody about how, I don't know, this other thing, this great concert or this, whatever it happens to be. If you don't have a financial plan and you're just working off of your most recent memory,
Back to
then
emotions. Yeah.
you're not going to get where you want to go as
That's
easily.
right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Helpful, like just guidance. So what else do you have in this deck?
Oh, well, let's see. So I thought I'd put in here some things that people might find interesting, or maybe something nobody thought of before, right? So this is a chart that I really like, and people talk about kind of accumulating money. What's your rate of return being while you're saving your money, right?
Mhm.
And let's say you assume something in this report. Let's say you got 8% return over a period of time. So you start putting away $10,000 a year. Your average is 8%, right? But that average is never the same, right? So one year you might get 12, the next year you get 4, another year you get 20, last year you got 20, this year you get 0 or -5 or whatever it is. So it's all over the place.
Yeah.
When you're accumulating money, it doesn't make that big of a difference, right? So if you start out in a period where there's really, really good returns in the markets, like a good long stretch, let's say this person that's in blue started in 2009. I'm sorry, that's in, it started in 2009 and ended kind of next year, right? So kind of had this great run up and then it fell off at the end.
Yeah.
Or this other person that's in the green started off slowly in a bad time, but it really took off after that, right? So as their snowball built, the money that they'd accumulated, that snowball experienced the greater upside. But in the end, there's a big difference there. Don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
but you can live with that. You adjust your goals either way.
Yeah.
Where it really matters is when you retire.
Hmm.
Okay, if you retired January 1st of 2008 as opposed to January 1st of 2010, your retirement experience is dramatically different.
Hmm.
You only worked for 2 more years, but you experienced 08 and 09 out of the gate. And so your returns coming out of the gate were much worse in that scenario. And because of that, there's much more risk related to retirement withdrawal. So one of the challenges when you're in retirement is what they call income planning. It deserves a lot of attention and kind of managing your withdrawal rate to be sensitive to kind of what's going on with your portfolio. So again, there's investments, right? We're managing our withdrawal rate. How are we going to allocate that? How are we going to make sure that it holds up? But it all ties back to the financial plan.
Yeah, that's
Okay?
great. Just as a reminder, it's one of the tools, and
Right.
this is like looking at over time. I think
Yes.
that's the key thing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yep. Hmm.
Um, so here's another one of the tools, which is long-term care. So a lot of people have questions about long-term care. So long-term care is defined by nursing facilities or assisted living or paid home care, whatever that might be. You know, the challenge with long-term care insurance, because anybody would like to have coverage to say that they're going to be taken care of in a situation like that. But the problem is it's expensive, right?
Hmm.
And so the reason it's expensive is because people use it, right? The odds of using it are fairly high because, you know, lifetime probability of needing long-term care service at some point, like there's a 70% chance that in a couple, somebody's going to need some form of long-term care. The question is how long it's going to last,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So if you knew that there was an 18% chance that you would get in a car accident, right?
Yep.
You would carry automobile insurance, right?
Yeah.
Your car accident, I don't know what the probabilities are. So again, so you think about retirement planning, you can't look at your retirement plan and I'm going to use this much money over time without taking into account that there's an 18% chance that you might need that money for something else. And does it make sense to protect against it or not? You
Yeah.
don't know until you have the conversation.
Okay.
All right.
Really interesting. Yep.
So, and then somebody asked about annuities just real quick. I think, so I'll take maybe 30 seconds on an annuities, which is like a complete disservice to the topic. And I apologize about that. But an annuity, the way annuities are used now, okay, is when annuities started, it was like basically like a pension. You had $100,000, you would make a deal with the insurance company. You'd give them your $100,000, and in exchange for that, they would pay you $1,000 a month for the rest of your life,
Hmm.
right? And if you lived another 30 years, you win, and if you die the next month, they win, sort of thing. It was this complete turnover of money to the insurance companies.
Okay.
Well, insurance companies are smart, and they realize that people don't want to do that, and so what they've done is that doesn't really even happen much anymore at all. But that tool has been adjusted a little bit
Hmm.
to provide insurance on people's portfolios at its most basic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I have my retirement account, my 401k plan, and I have a lifetime of accumulation in there, and I'm going to retire, and I'm worried about starting out with a down market.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that going to impact me?
Yeah.
An annuity is nothing more than a wrapper around an investment account that charges extra for insurance
Mm-hmm.
to protect you should things go down.
Okay.
Some
Yeah.
people need insurance, some people don't. If you don't need it, annuities are a ripoff. If you do need it, or if you would sleep better at night with it, maybe for some portion of some piece of people's portfolios, it makes sense. So I hope the woman who asked that question, that helps her.
Yeah, I don't think she's on the call this morning, but I'm sure she'll watch this recording.
All right, wow.
I had a conflict, but so like, who would need it?
So somebody who's really close to the bone, right? So somebody who needs to be absolutely positive that the money that they need, that they're relying on,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have a lot of wiggle room. They don't have a lot of extra money to be able to work their way through a crisis, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And I would say it should never be 100% of anybody's. I never say never, but rarely would it be 100% of somebody's total investment piece.
Mm-hmm.
Just enough to provide some cushion.
Okay.
All right. So
Thanks
enough on
for
it.
responding to that.
So a better way to approach retirement income planning, right, is we call it the bucket approach, right? So you've retired and you're going to be living, for the next 30 years, right? So how are you going to manage your investments? This is an investment. There's going to be a lot of investment stuff here because of JP Morgan and just because I thought people would find it interesting. So
sure.
You should have in cash, if you're retired, 18 months to 2 years worth of cash, just in the bank, available to you if you need it, not subject to pandemics, not subject to 9/11, not subject to financial crisis. It's just there, right? Then your other accounts, your investment accounts that you have, should replenish that cash as you move forward. That way, when March and April of this year happens, that, okay, these other two buckets, they're hurting, but I have 2 years worth of sustainability because of this cash account. So I'm going to drain down that bucket. And maybe this year we skip replenishing it because the other buckets have been down. Okay. Right. Yeah. So income planning in retirement is in my mind, all about buckets. Does that make sense?
It does. It totally makes sense. And I'm going to ask you about how to deal with life if you had not done that before. Now here we are, but we'll wait till you're finished with this so that we can go back to full screen of you.
Okay. So let me, all right. Well, now's as good a time as now. I want to make sure I talk about the things that you think are most important. So I'll stop screen sharing to kind of tell me what you're thinking in that.
Yeah. And then we'll go back to that because there's a couple other visuals in there that I think everybody would benefit from. So I'm just thinking about those of us on the call who have had dramatic financial impact and, have no income, or our businesses are closed down, or, we own a restaurant or a nail salon or whatever, or even, we are still employed, but our investments have gone down. We get our statements every month and it's like,
Right.
So what practical advice do you have for just dealing with A, the emotion, which I think is a big part of it, and then B, the practicality of just, keeping the trains running on time, so to speak?
Yeah. So I guess my initial reaction is that it's money, and money has emotions tied to it. And money is part of this. Well, my plan was this, or I was going to do that. Right. And like I said, with my guide rails, life just comes at us, and, our best laid plans, they change. And I know that a lot of people have really, had it really change abruptly and in a really bad way during this time. And like, it's just been a horrible time for a lot of people. So the emotional piece of that, just like if you can just separate the financials from the emotions And I find the way I do that is by putting it on a piece of paper, right? Instead of having it running around in my head, just get it on I'm a big spreadsheet person. I'm gonna put it on a spreadsheet where I can say, okay, here's where I am.
Mm-hmm.
Then identify perspective in that, let's say it's me. My daughter's going to college in 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not retiring for 15, 20 years, right? So I have an opportunity. So when I look at kind of the financial impact of what's going on, these things that I care about, how do I prioritize them and address them in compartments as best I can? And say, okay, well, so I need to find a way to pay for Audrey's college, and then create tasks to say, okay, well, I'm going to reach out to Pitt, and that's where my daughter's going to school, and say, how can you help me? Because the one thing that is true in this scenario, which I don't know, I've been through a lot of crises in my career, but the resources and the attempt by all institutions to help are there. I think the problem is making sense of it, right? So knowing what's out there, knowing who to call, compartmentalizing it and prioritizing, and being able to say, well, today is Thursday, and today I'm going to focus on the college. Yep. Right. So I'm going to call Pitt, and I'm going to look for student loans, and I'm going to do this thing. And then by the end of today, I'm going to be able to take that and set it to the side because I'll know what my plan is.
Right. Yeah. Because you find that comfort in the knowing. And
I do have something that I really do want to share with everybody, which is again, I get flooded with information, and I got a piece from Principal's 401k group, which has this great, I don't know how to describe it. Every question you can think of, or I could think of anyway, surrounding the pandemic and a reaction to the pandemic has resources in there. Everything from how do I pay for my kids' college, to how do I deal best with working from home, to where do I go get my tests for COVID tests, to
mental wellness was on there,
unemployment numbers, like everything you could think of. So I contacted them. They're happy to let me share.
Thank you. The things, there was a question about where can they find a financial advisor? What would be your
Yes, I think so. The CFP, Certified Financial Planning site, has a search tool that is effective. There's also a thing called Broker Check. So anybody who's registered with FINRA. So I'm not even going to waste everybody's time with all these.
Can you just send me some links that I can put in my follow-up?
Yeah. So I'll put some links in there. So there's resources there to kind of research, and then I'll say that meet with them, talk to them, and make sure you feel comfortable with them. That you can, it's a trust relationship more than anything.
Everyone on this call happens to be female, just so you know.
So then I think that one of the things within my industry is make sure that you're heard, and that you're acknowledged, and that you are getting what you need out of the relationship. So we have had people who come and work with us, which I'm not here promoting anything, but who have had bad experiences where they go in with their spouse, and everybody, and the advisor only talks to one person versus both people. And it's, clearly not the way to do things. So I have actually a piece that I shared with you, Shannon, about, kind of financial planning for women, which we can put on the website too.
Yeah, I'll make sure that they get that. I think they'll appreciate where that's coming from, and the power that women have in the earning space, and the wise decision making, I think, that I have found women make, because it's comprehensive. So I think that's helpful. I mean, it's helpful for everybody.
Yep.
So could you just share some of the other visuals that you showed me in our preparation? Because I found that the bigger picture, a theme of what you're saying, Chris, is like looking at the bigger picture, looking at the full kit and caboodle here. So just, can you give us a little?
I will. So, I'm just going to call that, look, we'll just talk a little bit about kind of the economy and kind of investment, kind of basics and timing. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So this is investments again, which, is why maybe we're all accused of being investment people, but it's such a big part of our financial plan, and we hear about it on the news all the time that it might be good to make you feel a little bit of calm in the sense of this storm. So this chart here talks about basically time. So at the bottom, you have 1 year, 5, 10, and 20 years. Then you have the three colors, right? The green, the blue, and the gray. So the green is if you invested all your money just in the stock market, right? And what you have is your best single year. Well, you got 47% return. That was from 1950 through 2019. And your worst year was negative 39%. That's a wild ride.
Yes.
And so if you chose bonds, right, that slims down your ride a little bit. It's not quite as crazy. And then, of course, as you've heard from every person you've ever talked to, allocation 50-50, diversification makes sense. And it really kind of narrows it down to 33 to negative 15. Still not particularly pleasant, but way more tolerable. The key is time. And the reason everybody asks, I'm saving for college, I'm saving for retirement, I'm saving for a new house, how long do you have, is because the more time you have, the more predictable your rate of return can be. So you can make assumptions in your planning that would say, all right, well, I'm going to have a 50-50 portfolio, and I'm going to assume 5 and 6% over the next 20 years. And I feel fairly confident I'll be able to reach that, because historically that's the worst case scenario. And by the way, if I get 10, then that's all the better. Yes. So I think that the asset allocation is much better to think about, because what you hear about on the news, this is the quilt, everybody always loves this chart, is about
hard to look at, but it tells a great story.
Is about like what the S&P 500 is doing, for example. So in this chart, this lime green color is the S&P 500. Okay, S&P 500 is the 500 largest American companies by market capitalization. Okay, and so what you'll see is, last year it did 31%. The year before that, it lost 4%. The year before that, it was up 21%. So it's this kind of up and down ride with the S&P 500. But when you turn the news on and all they ever talk about is how the S&P 500 is up or down, you get a distorted view of what the ride is really like if you do it right. So if you do asset allocation, which is what, yep.
Yeah.
Did you say so? So the asset allocation is a much more pleasant ride, which is why you always hear people like me talk about that. So if you look at this chart on the bottom, right, this talks about average investors, right? So over the last 20 years, right, this green is the S&P 500, a 60-40 allocation, right, did almost the same, 0.5% difference. Right? But you didn't have this wild up and down ride, right? So you're better able to hang in there for the ride. Over here on the right is what the average investor did, 2.5% return. So the markets did 5 to 6% over that period of time, but the average investor did half of that. That reason is emotion. Okay, that reason is getting out at the wrong times. So this is another one of my favorite charts.
Yeah.
All right, hang with me, everybody who doesn't like economic charts. This is a good one, okay? So the gray lines on this chart are what the S&P 500 did for calendar years. So for example, in 1980, it was up 26%, and then 81, it was down 10, then up 15, up 17. So what you can see is it's up more often than it's not. It's down about one out of every 5 years, okay? The red dots are during the year, the lowest it went, okay? So in 1980, you got 26% return if you were in it for the entire year, but there was a time in 1980 when it was down 17%, okay? Last year, the market was up 29%, but there was a time when it was down 7%, right? So what happens is we hear the news, we hear about these crises, we hear about tech booms and global crisis and 9/11 and Y2K and whatever the crisis of the year is. Remember Greek debt? Like all these things we're supposed to worry about. If we just hang in there with a plan over a long period of time and we don't have these knee-jerk reactions to the media constantly flooding us with bad news, then over time we'll be more successful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So it's a tenacity game. It's a waiting game.
Yeah.
It's the check your emotions so that you're not making impulsive decisions based on current events and the riding it out. And I think this chart is also showing us how there are peaks and valleys for sure, some deeper valleys than others, and we're in a deep valley right now. But it's saying that when we can hang on to our investments,
Right.
diversify them, there is a long-term benefit.
Right. And so these gray bars are recessions, right? And their recessions will happen. And that's just part of the market cycle. And if you have 2 years, if you're in retirement, you have 2 years in cash, right? Or if you're in a situation where you're not expecting to pay for college in 4 months and you don't have money kind of set aside for that. And again, hindsight's 2020. Don't get me wrong. Like, we're all kind of caught off guard by this.
Yeah.
That's the reason people talk like that. That's why people who are conservative and very practical in how they save and invest their money are able over the long haul to kind of hang in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me show you a couple other good charts here. So the challenge that people face and the reason that the average investor doesn't perform very well is they get out of the market. So I had people I've been working with for 20 years, right? Who back in March, we were having conversations like, I think I'll get out and then I'll get back in when it's better, right? I'm going to get out. And then when I feel like things are starting to work out, I'll get back in. Well, what has happened? Things haven't worked out. Like, we're still not like worked out, but the markets have already rebounded back significantly, right? So the S&P 500 for the year is down around 10%. Okay. So the stock market is a leading indicator. It reacts before some of these other things fall into play. So what happens is, if you're trying to time it, you're going to be late. And by definition, you're going to miss the up days. Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure.
And then we've also seen a lot more volatility over these last couple of days. Sorry. All right, everybody shut your eyes. I'm going to go through these things really fast because I hit the wrong button. So we've seen a lot of volatility. So this bottom chart here talks about the volatility index, like how crazy things are. And whenever there's a crisis, the market goes up and down real quick. But then it goes up one last time and you missed it, right? So if you missed the 10 best days, right, from 2000 to 2019, your return went from 6% to 2.5%, right? So if you're trying to time it, you're like, oh, I'm gonna get back in when things get better. By definition, you're gonna miss it.
Okay. So in other words, stay in.
I'm sorry?
Stay in.
Stay in, right? And it's hard. Yeah. It's really hard.
Yeah. Especially when you're feeling desperate and you're like looking for things. So you're thinking this is a way out.
Like, I get it. Like, it's not real. It's very real. But back to kind of your board of directors or advisors perspective, everybody needs somebody to say, okay, it's going to be okay. Take a deep breath. Let's talk about it. All right,
what is this showing us?
Couple COVID things I thought might be interesting. And this is old. This is as of April 30th, which the way time moves now is, light years, 2 weeks. But basically at the time, there was just over 1 million confirmed cases and about 63,000 deaths in the US related to the coronavirus. And this is US wide, kind of how the curve has gone. CNN on their website has a really cool chart that they update daily where you can look at your state. Yeah. And you can actually see by state how the curves are going, which is really interesting and helps to explain a lot about why we have these different opinions and everybody's kind of reacting differently to the situation now about reopening.
And it's showing that the shelter in place strategy is working.
Yes, for flattening the curve, right? And curves are flattening. And so then the question is, so what's next? Which I think we're all grappling with.
Everybody's wondering. Yes, for sure.
So this chart talks a little bit about those industries that are most vulnerable to social distancing, right? So restaurants, hotels, entertainment, transportation, right? So they make up, from a consumer spending standpoint, just under 20% of the total GDP of the country. About 20% of the payroll jobs also they account for. And 20% is a lot of people, and there's a lot of ripple effects, as we've all witnessed with all the people that we know who have been impacted.
Yeah.
What you see here, though, is it's only 7% of the operating earnings of the S&P 500. So when people say, how can the stock market be going up when
Yeah.
all my local restaurants are struggling?
That's right.
Well, it's because the restaurants aren't on the S&P 500. Amazon's on the S&P 500, right? And Facebook and Home Depot,
Mhm.
and they're all thriving or
Google.
doing okay. Anyway, I wouldn't call them thriving.
Yeah.
That might be an understatement. So I think that that's some good perspective in that you can't just look at any particular economic numbers.
Yes. Yes.
And then the Fed, again, this is a couple weeks old, but I won't. They've spent $2.5 trillion. The federal government has. They've spent more since then. There's more aid packages in the Congress. No politics here. We're going to have to come out of this at some point. And if we can reduce the damage, right, and kind of get everybody through it until we eventually do come out of it, because it is going to be finite, then our recovery is going to be that much better. That's why, in theory, big picture, spending money, government money to support all of us as we go through this makes sense. Whether it's being done right or how you would do it differently, don't worry about that. It's just logical to spend the money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The U.S. government is spending money, and then the Fed is reacting by taking interest rates basically down to zero, which theoretically allows access to capital for companies as they're trying to kind of make their way through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the government is doing what they can, albeit imperfectly, because that's what a democracy is.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you for that perspective. That really helps.
So on politics, this chart is really interesting in that it's a historical outlook on whether or not a person thinks things are going well, and it breaks them out as to whether or not they're Republican or they're Democrat, right? So I'm going to not make any comments on this chart, but what's interesting is when Republicans are in office and they think things are going better, and then when Democrats are in office, Democrats think things are doing better.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we have is our news sources, which are flooding us with information from perspectives, and it's very disheartening.
Yeah.
And I think that, I'm going to get off of this screen, but I think it's really important that we don't let all that noise wear us down, right? We have our own situation. We have our own sheet of paper with our accounts on it that we have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff is just noise.
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful perspective. And I like the context that you've offered us and the different ways that we can look at, the world and the economy and the ups and the downs. And like the key takeaway that I got from this discussion is that we have to have variety. We have to recognize that we've got a whole host of tools. And if we don't know how to use them, or if we don't even know what they are, that, some of the resources that you're going to share with us and you can share with us can educate, and then to stay in the game, that it's a long game. And as much as we're in a rough patch right now, if we view this as like a chance to just bear down and, hang in there and be resourceful and find other ways to reduce the pain associated with the lack of income, then, that's the wisest thing to do at this point.
And I think that hope matters. I think perspective matters. I think that, we have all been affected by this, some more than others, and it's, truly, truly been a difficult time. But the hope is that we're moving out, right? Unemployment claims, new unemployment claims are down, keep coming down every week. More people are traveling. TSA numbers are starting to go back up. They're nowhere near where they were, but they're growing. Hotels are, having more people stay there. And again, whether politically that's the right thing to do to open up, I don't know, but it has to happen at some point, and we're going to see where all that takes us. But from an economic perspective, there's some green shoots, like there's a little bit of spring happening.
Yeah.
And, I think we can only just hope and pray that, it keeps up and, we come out of this sooner rather than later.
Oh my gosh. Agreed. Oh, thank you, Chris. Thanks for investing time with us, answering our questions. We didn't have a lot pop up during our discussion today, but I'm sure you've provided some food for thought, and to keep that perspective in mind, stay in the game, stay hopeful, communicate, You know, the other thing I'm hearing from you is like, just communicate with someone. Say like, this is where I'm stuck, or this doesn't make sense to me, so that we can help each other find the answers that we need.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. And, I encourage, I'm gonna put some resources that I've collected on the website. And, I think do a little research. It's important stuff.
Yeah. We just got to thank you from Sherry. She said, thank you for the super information and providing calmness and hope to all of us.
Well, that's nice. Yeah, best of luck to everybody. It was a pleasure to participate. So.
Oh, all right. We'll see you soon, Chris.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thanks again.